John Smith leaves Jamestown in the fall, October of 1609. He's injured, slightly injured in a gunpowder explosion. She isn't told. She knows nothing about it. This was apparently of concern to her later. She just assumed that he was dead. Suddenly he was gone. And relations between the colony and the Indians deteriorate greatly at that point, because this back and forth between Pocahontas and John Smith can't continue.
Who was the real Pocahontas? Pocahontas and John Smith. The real Pocahontas. Not much is known about this memorable woman. What we do know was written by others, as none of her thoughts or feelings were ever recorded. Specifically, her story has been told through written historical accounts, and most recently through the sacred oral history of the Mattaponi. Most notably, Pocahontas has left an indelible impression that has endured for more than 400 years, and yet many people who know her name do not know much about her. What is the real story of John Smith and Pocahontas? Did the real Pocahontas marry John Smith? And was she even a real person? Before we begin, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Early life. Pocahontas was a Native American woman born around 1595. She was the daughter of the powerful chief Powhatan, the ruler of the Powhatan tribal nation, which at its strongest included around 30 Algonquin communities located in its Tidewater region of Virginia. As far as historians know, nothing in Pocahontas' childhood indicated she would have become known as a folk icon. But when the first European settlers arrived at Powhatan land to begin the colony of Jamestown, Pocahontas became embroiled in a series of events with Captain John Smith and John Rolfe that permanently linked her to America's colonial heritage. Her real name was Amawante, and she also had the more private name Motaraka. Pocahontas was her nickname, which, depending on who you ask, means playful one or ill-behaved child. As a daughter of Chief Powhatan, Pocahontas may have had more luxuries than many of her peers, but she still had to learn a so-called woman's work, such as farming, cooking, collecting herbs, building a house, making clothes, butchering meat, and tanning hides. This narrative of Pocahontas turning her back on her own people and allying with the English, thereby finding common ground between the two cultures, has endured for centuries. But in actuality, Pocahontas' life was much different than how Smith's or mainstream culture tells it. It's even disputed whether or not Pocahontas' age, 11 or 12, even rescued the mercantile soldier and explorer at all, as Smith might have misinterpreted what was actually a ritual ceremony or even just lifted the tale from a popular Scottish ballad. Pocahontas and John Smith. Pocahontas was primarily linked to the English colonists through Captain John Smith, who arrived in Virginia with more than 100 other settlers in April 1607. The Englishmen had numerous encounters over the next several months with the Secomata Indians while exploring on the Chickahominy River in December of that year. Smith was captured by a hunting party led by Powhatan's close relative Opuncoaka and brought to Powhatan's home at Werowockama. The details of the episode are inconsistent within Smith's writing. In his 1608 account, Smith described a large feast followed by a talk with Powhatan. In this account, he does not meet Pocahontas for the first time until a few months later, in 1616. However, Smith revised the story in a letter to Queen Anne, who was anticipating the arrival of Pocahontas with her husband, John Rolfe. Smith's 1616 account describes a dramatic act of selflessness, which would become legendary. At the minute of my execution, he wrote, she, Pocahontas, hazarded the beating out of her own brains to save mine, and not only that, but so prevailed with her father that I was safely conducted to Jamestown. Smith further embellished this story in his General History, written years later. Smith's account of Pocahontas' life-saving efforts is hotly debated, partly because he wrote different versions of the initial meeting with Chief Powhatan. Many historians believe Smith was never in peril, and the placement of his head on the stones was ceremonial. Even so, if Smith's explanation of the incident is true, he had no way of knowing about Powhatan's ceremonial customs, and from his terrified point of view, Pocahontas was undoubtedly his benevolent rescuer. Pocahontas saves John Smith again. Pocahontas became known by the colonists as an important Powhatan emissary. She occasionally brought the hungry settlers food and helped successfully negotiate the release of Powhatan prisoners in 1608. But relations between the colonists and Indian remained strained. By 1609, drought, starvation, and disease had ravaged the colonists, and they became increasingly dependent on the Powhatan to survive. Desperate and dying, they threatened to burn Powhatan towns for food, so Chief Powhatan suggested a barter with Captain Smith. When negotiations collapsed, the chief supposedly planned an ambush and Smith's execution, but Pocahontas warned Smith of her father's plans and saved his life again. Pocahontas' interactions with the English were not just for fun and games. As a daughter of the prominent chief, she played a very diplomatic role between the two cultures. In late 1609, John Smith returned to England for medical care. The English told the Indians that Smith was dead. According to the colonist William Statry, Pocahontas married a warrior called Coacum at some point before 1612. Nothing more is known about this marriage. In 1613, Pocahontas was visiting the Potawatomi, a tribe that paid tribute to her father, the paramount chief Powhatan, at their town called Passapatansi. In April of that year, the English captain Samuel Argall devised a plan to kidnap Pocahontas and hold her for ransom, hoping her father would return English prisoners and stolen tools. Argall received help from Eopasas, the lesser chief of the Potawatomi, who lured Pocahontas onto Argall's ship. Once aboard, Argall refused to let her leave, informing her that he planned to hold her ransom. Argall presented Eopasas with a copper kettle and other gifts in exchange for his help in the kidnapping plot. Though Powhatan eventually returned the prisoners, Pocahontas remained with the English, living at Jamestown and then upriver at Henaricus. Pocahontas learned the English language and by 1614 had converted to Christianity, and she was baptized Rebecca. During her religious instruction, Pocahontas met widower John Rolfe, who would become famous for introducing the cash crop tobacco to the settlers in Virginia. By all English accounts, the two fell in love and wanted to marry. Perhaps, once Pocahontas was kidnapped, Coacum, her first husband, realized divorce was inevitable. There was a form of divorce in Powhatan society. Once Powhatan was sent word that Pocahontas and Rolfe wanted to marry, his people would have considered Pocahontas and Coacum divorced. Powhatan consented to the proposed marriage and sent an uncle of Pocahontas's to represent him and her people at the wedding. The marriage led to the Peace of Pocahontas, a lull in the inevitable conflicts between the English and Powhatan Indians. The Rolfes soon had a son named Thomas. The Virginia Company of London, who had funded the settling of Jamestown, decided to make use of the favorite daughter of the great Powhatan to their advantage. They thought, as a Christian convert married to an Englishman, Pocahontas could encourage interest in Virginia and the company. Journey to England. In 1616, Sir Thomas Dale sailed to England to rally financial support for the Virginia Company, the company owned by wealthy Londoners that had financed the Jamestown colony. The company also wanted to prove that they met their goal of converting Native Americans to Christianity, so Ralph, Pocahontas, their infant son Thomas, and a dozen Powhatan Indians accompanied Dale on the trip. In London, Pocahontas was revered as a princess, referred to as Lady Rebecca Wolfe. She attended plays and balls and was even presented to the royal family. Much to her surprise, Pocahontas encountered Captain Smith, whom she thought was dead in London. Although she was overcome with emotion upon seeing him alive, she also reportedly chastised him for his treatment of Chief Powhatan and her people. The Virginia Company commissioned a portrait of Pocahontas dressed in expensive clothes with an engraved label that said, Mattawaka alias Rebecca, daughter of the most powerful prince of the Powhatan Empire of Virginia. It is the only image drawn of her in person. Death. Although she was considered in good health right before leaving England, Pocahontas suddenly fell ill and died after dining with Rolfe and Argall, the man who kidnapped her. The tribesmen who accompanied Pocahontas on the trip believed she was poisoned. At the time of her death, Pocahontas was around 21 years of age. She was buried in Gravesend, England at St. George's Church on March 21, 1617. The location of her remains is unknown. Very few records of the life of Pocahontas remain. The only contemporary portrait is Simon van de Pas' engraving of 1616, which emphasizes her Indian features. Later portraits often portray her as more European in appearance. The myths that arose around Pocahontas' story in the 19th century portrayed her as an emblem of the potential of Native Americans to be assimilated into European society. The imagined relationship between John Smith and Pocahontas romanticizes the theme of assimilation and dramatizes the meeting of two cultures. Many films about Pocahontas have been made, beginning with a silent film in 1924 and continuing into the 21st century. She is one of the best-known Native Americans in history, and one of a few to appear regularly in historical textbooks. And that's it for today's video. Don't forget to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and tell us what you want to see next in the comments section down below.